This morning, though, I'm going to just begin by telling you the story. There was a girl named Maria who decided she was going to break up with her boyfriend, Jimmy. And she didn't want to be with him anymore. So Maria decided to send Jimmy one of those breakup texts. So she sent the text, and it read like this. And she sent the text. He got it. And then about a year later, Jimmy got another text from Maria. And this text read this. It said, "Hey, baby, I miss you bad. I just can't stop thinking about you. I can't get you out of my mind. Let's get together ASP. Congratulations on winning the lottery. Love ya." That's not a good relationship. And that's probably a bad example on relationships. But this morning, we're going to begin a new series in our church, and it's called Better Together. And as we look at this series, it's all about relationships because none of us lives in a bubble. We're all connected with people every day. And so we're going to be talking about our relationships. Now, this series is not just for husbands and wives, because we deal with people of all different types. We deal with our church relationships with the body of Christ. We deal with our neighbors and our friends and our workplaces. And we deal in our family life as well. But we're going to be looking at all throughout the series. It's kind of like making a cake. What we're going to be doing is giving you some key ingredients to having better relationships. And so this morning we'll be looking at the first key ingredient, which is a relationship with God matters in your relationships. One of the things that as I was asking the Lord, I said, God, give me a word that describes relationships today. As I kept thinking and praying about it, the word that kept coming to my mind was the word superficial. And I don't know if someone else has got that out there or not, but it was new to me. It's a new thought. I think today, many relationships we have relationships that are a mile long and an inch deep. And a lot of them are superficial relationships. Like you may have a social media account. I don't even know how many friends supposedly I have on that account anymore. But most of those relationships are superficial. And let me just kind of give you a definition of the word superficial. Its definition of superficial from Webster's is relating to or locating near the surface, lying on, not penetrating below, or affecting the surface. Example, superficial wounds. Concerned only with the obvious or apparent, shallow, seen on the surface, external, presenting only an appearance without substance or significance. I think most of our friendships and relationships today sound a lot like that. They're superficial, they're shallow, they're not deep, they just are the hello, how are you doing kind of relationships. And it's crazy because with all the mass communication today and everything at the tip of the finger, you would think that our relationships would be deeper and stronger than they are today. But reality is, the more we seem to go in the future, the less our relationships will have real meaning anymore. And I don't think God is crazy with that idea. If you think back to Genesis chapter 1 in creation, it's kind of like a song almost. It's kind of like a rhythm that goes throughout the chapter. Chapter 1, God creates, and then he says, it is good. Day 1, God creates light, and it is good. Day 2, God creates, and it is good. And you come all the way through the 6 days of creation, and then you move into chapter 2, and you go down to verse 18. And all of a sudden, for the first time, something is not good. In verse 18, it says, it is not good for man to be alone. For the first time, it's as though God looks down and says, something is not good with creation. And typically we hear this verse read during weddings, but this isn't just a verse that applies for marital bliss. It's not just a generic statement. I mean, it is a generic statement. It's good for man. It's not good for man to be alone. It's almost like the rest of the Bible is a response to that statement. When you go back to Genesis chapter 1, you kind of read through and you kind of realize that God created light first because light is the foundation for the universe. Without light, nothing else living exists. Without light, you don't have sight, you don't have perception, you don't have radio, you don't have television, you don't have the food chain, you don't have heat, you don't have any of that. As light is to the basis of the foundation of the universe, so human relationship, or not being alone, is the basis for the human relationship of the universe. If that makes sense. We're not talking about solitude. Solitude is like when you voluntarily choose to be by yourself. And there are times that you probably do that, and everybody needs a little healthy dose of that, where you voluntarily choose to be alone. But we're talking about an involuntary choosing. Because involuntary aloneness doesn't work. You see, when God created us, He created us for relationship. Primarily a relationship with Him first, but then a relationship with others. Because when God made the statement, it's not good for man to be alone, where was man? Well, he was still living in the garden. Man hadn't sinned yet. And every day he had fellowship with God. And he had fellowship with the animals, but there was still something missing. It was the fellowship of other people in his life. And God said, this isn't good. I'm sure that all of you in here remember 9/11. What a horrible day that was. And you think of those Twin Towers in particular. And you think of the phone messages that we heard of those who were in the top part of those towers. There was two things that you seem to hear over and over again. One was a crying out to God for help. There are a lot of people that were praying at the top of those towers and throughout those towers, crying out to God for help. And then there were all the phone messages that we heard that were played back of people calling husbands or wives or children or mothers or fathers and saying, you know, I don't think I'm going to make it out of here, but I want you to know I love you. I know right before I went back for bypass surgery, there were two things. I was doing the same thing. I was crying out to God, saying, God, help me. I was crying out to God, I need you right now more than ever. And then I remember crying out to my wife and my kids and telling them how much I loved them and cared for them, or, what they meant to me. There was a whole lot of crying going on as they wheeled me back. In crisis, we reach out for relationship. We reach out for a relationship with God, and we reach out for a relationship with others in times of crisis. It's kind of what the Great Commandment is like in Matthew 22. Matter of fact, I'm going to read beginning in verse 34. I know it's on the screen in verse 37 in your notes. I think it picks up in verse 37 as well, but I want to set the stage because Jesus gives the Great Commandment. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply. They met together to question him again. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with this question. Teacher, which is the most important commandment of the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. A second, equally important, is to love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Jesus is saying there are two things that are really important to do. And the first begins with our relationship with God because it matters, is that vertical relationship. Having that vertical relationship of love and a relationship with God in our life. Then he says there's a horizontal relationship with others that matters as well. Here's the thing, and this is really the big point of the morning, is that if this vertical relationship with God is not right, then the horizontal relationship doesn't work very well. The first ingredient for the cake on relationships has got to be our relationship with God. That it really does matter in our relationship with him. And I want to show you this from Acts. And I want everybody to turn here now. Acts 17. I don't care how you get there, what you use, but get to Acts 17 and look down in verse 22. Because here's what I want to share with you this morning. Acts 17, verse 22. So Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows. Men of Athens, I noticed that you were very religious in every way. For I was walking along, I saw your many shrines. And one of your altars had this inscription on it. To an unknown God. This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples, and in human hands can't serve his needs. For he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything. He satisfies every need. From one man he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries. By the way, in these few verses here, Paul's talking about God's, what theologians would call his transcendence, his greatness, that we have a really great God. Don't think for a moment that God just lives here in this building, you know. He's bigger than this building. He's bigger than any one church can hold him or contain him. Nobody has a market on God. There's no church that has it all, everything about God. There isn't one. God's bigger than that. God's bigger than us. He's much larger than we are. He is the creator God. This is talking about how big of a God he is. And then we go down and we look at verses 27 and 8. His purposes was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. For in him we live and move and exist. As some of your own prophets have said, we are his offspring. And since this is true, we shouldn't think of God as an idol designed by craftsmen from gold or silver or stone. And what he's talking about here is God's intimacy. It's God's closeness. As great and big a God as he is, he wants to be personally involved in our lives. He knows every detail about us. And then we pick up verse 30. God overlooked people's ignorance about the things in early times, but now he commands everyone, everywhere, to repent of their sins and turn to him. For he has set a day for judging the world with justice by the man he has appointed. And he proved to everyone who this is by raising him from the dead. When they heard Paul speak about the resurrection of the dead, some laughed in contempt, but others said, we want to hear more about this later. Let's stop there. There's a couple of things I want to point out to you from this passage that really tell us how we can know God. Because if we're going to have relationships right with other people, we've got to know God. So how do we know God? I have a friend. He's a longtime friend. He's a good buddy. And a couple of years back, he decided he was going to take his family on a trip across country. And they're going to stop at all the historical sites along the way. Which I'm sure is hysterical for them. But anyway. So they were going around the country. They went to Mount Rushmore and kind of working their way down and all. And they finally got to the Grand Canyon. So he was telling me about his trip to the Grand Canyon. So I said, Gilbert, I said, how long did you stay at the Grand Canyon? You ready for this? Oh, we stayed about an hour and a half. I said, I got to pick on him. He's a longtime friend. I said, you mean you stayed an hour and a half at the Grand Canyon? How did you make it there so long? I mean, it's only like one of the greatest national treasures we have in America. I mean, how is it that you only managed to stay there for an hour and a half? I said, come on, I know you. You went to IHOP and you probably stayed there at least an hour and a half, right? He said, yeah, how do you know? I said, I guess it's because it's like the International House of Prayer. And you only saw a national treasure, so I mean, an hour and a half. I said, okay, Gilbert, you probably spent at least 30 minutes in the gift shop, right? Right. Yeah, we went to the gift shop. So really you only saw it for an hour, right? You mean you went to the most beautiful place that some would say on the planet, and you stood there, and you looked out, and you only stayed there for an hour? He said, well, Lee, he said, my wife said, when she got back to the hotel, she said, we could have got to the hotel quicker, but you had to stay at the Grand Canyon for so long. That's typical man blaming on the wife. An hour and a half at the Grand Canyon. It's kind of like the way a lot of people do with God. They just want to come and kind of look over the ledge and look at God and then walk away. They just want to get right to the rim. By the way, I had to tell Gilbert, you realize you really didn't even go to the Grand Canyon? Because just to go there and get to the rim, you're not even technically in the Grand Canyon. You're just looking over the edge. And there are a lot of people that just want to have a relationship with God that's just a Sunday morning, occasionally pop in, look at God, oh, that's great, and then pull away. They have what I would call like a drive-through Christianity. You know what I mean? When they've got an urgent need, they pull in. They pop in. And they'll say, and they'll pull up to the window and they'll say, Lord, I really could use a financial miracle. And could you supersize it for me? Because it would really help, And they pull in. Or like they show up and they go, oh, God, I really need help with my marriage because nobody's happy. Can I have a happy meal? And they just kind of drive in, get a little bit, and pull away. And I'm always like, God, you're just too good to them. Because God, He's like weighing on them. And they pull in, he loves on them, and he ministers to them, and he cares for them. Because his grace is that great. And I'm like, God, what is up with this? You ought to slap him a few times, Wake him up. But God, out of his grace and his mercy, loves them in spite of themselves. Because what he really wants and what he longs for is a real relationship. He wants them to come in and dine with him. And he's hoping and he's waiting for that day where they will come in and fellowship with God. And yet they stay on the outside. Do you see this phrase here? It's at the end of verse 25. It says, he satisfies every need. I underlined it in my Bible. I marked it. Because how true that is. Because this is huge when it comes to relationship with others. If we don't get our needs met, it's hard to be a person who can reach out and touch others. You've heard this golden rule that John Maxwell has coined that's been used till you're almost at nausea probably with it. But hurting people hurt people. People who haven't been touched by God yet are a far greater chance to hurt someone else in relationships. Really, really did enjoy last Sunday when Pat shared his testimony. Pat, you did a great job in his song. I think we ought to give Pat a hand. Amen. That was great, wasn't it? That was bold. And he just did it so well. As I thought about that, Pat said, I have a need in my life. And he came to God to meet that need. And because he turned his life over to Christ, and you just correct me if I'm wrong, God helped meet those needs in your life. Because he did, it has made him a much better father, a much better husband, a much better person to be in relationship with. Before your relationship with Christ, he could have probably very easily been a person who was still hurt and still could be a bad situation. But because of what Christ has done in his life, it's made a huge difference. And I think we need to realize that, because as we look at our relationship with Christ and we think about Christ satisfying our needs, we all have wounds that we need to be healed from. And if we don't allow Christ to take out the garbage out of our life and take it to the road, all we do is dump garbage into somebody else's life, whether it's fair or not. All we do is take what's inside of us and pour it into somebody else. In order for us to have healthy relationships with one another, our relationship with God really does matter. Because here's the thing. If I'm still dealing with anger, because I feel like that someone else has wronged me, then I can't love other people. Because it becomes really hard to love someone when you're filled with anger inside. Because you're really only thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the wrong that somebody else has done to you and how wrong it was. And so you're pretty much, at that point, mentally locked in on me. Until you come to Christ and surrender all that's inside to God. And say, Lord, I'm going to lay it down at the cross. what was done to me wasn't right. It was wrong. Lord, I surrender that right of this thing. I give it to you. And then healing begins to flow. It's hard to love when you have guilt inside. I'm just going to give you a few examples. It's really hard to love when there's guilt because maybe of the sins that you have committed or the things that you have done wrong. And so you feel guilty. It's hard to love others. It's hard to be a godly parent when you're dealing with guilt. And if you don't take time to come to Christ and surrender that sin and surrender that guilt and realize there's now no condemnation to those in Christ Jesus, if you don't have that moment with God, then you're very vulnerable in relationships. It's hard to love if you still have greed. And by greed, I mean because I think life has been unfair, and I deserve to have this, and I don't have this, and why don't I have this, and I should have this, and so I'm always coveting what other people have. It makes it very hard in relationships if I don't come to God and surrender my life to Him and realize I have what I have because He's given it to me. And I'm grateful for what I have. It's really hard in relationships. It's hard to love others when I still deal with fear. Because I'm afraid to trust someone else. It's hard. You see, we're on this journey. But if we don't make a connection with God and get our relationship with God right, the value of our friendships and relationships will always be skewed. They'll be manipulated towards our needs. They'll be self-seeking. They'll be shallow and distant. But if we can get our relationship with God right, and we know our relationship with God matters, then it makes our relationship with others a whole new way. The second thing you ought to underline from this thing is, number one, He satisfies my needs. He satisfies every need. Anything going on in your life, you can come to God today, and I know that God is going to meet that need. Second thing is we need to seek Him. We need to seek Him. Do you know 5 million people go to the Grand Canyon every year? 5 million. But like I said a moment ago, most only stand at the edge. Most only get to the rim, usually the south end, and look over. Most really have never been to the Grand Canyon. Because to go to the Grand Canyon, you got to go to the Grand Canyon. Most of you probably know this, but in case you don't, you can actually take a tour and go all the way down from rim to rim. If you're a top athlete, you can make it in one day. It's a 22-mile trip. And it is very steep and very rugged. Some of us in here have climbed Table Rock together. It makes Table Rock look like a day walk in the park. Is that taxing on your body? They'll suggest in the park ranger guide to take a one-day overnighter where you go down and spend the night when you get down to Colorado River down at the bottom and then go up. But if you're my age and in my shape, you probably need to make it a 4-day journey. And you probably need to go about 6 miles a day. But there's beauty in that. Because you're not rushing through the Grand Canyon. You're stopping to enjoy the sights along the way. Those who dare to go down and take the journey and go through to rim, you see the Grand Canyon like those who stand at the edge and look over, never get to see. You'll see sights that others will never get to see. Matter of fact, you'll go down and you'll see Ribbon Falls, which actually you can get behind the falls and watch them go down over you, like in front of you, and get the mist from the water to cool you off. You'll get to stop and hit the Colorado River, and they call it the beach area. But you get to go right down and take off your shoes and put your feet in the water. And let that cool water run over your feet. Can you imagine what it must look like to watch the sun begin to set and you're in the Grand Canyon? You get a different perspective than looking down. When you're looking up, and there's this one place in particular where you can see the sun begin to set, and you don't look towards the sun. You look 180 degrees the opposite way, and you see all the light reflecting off the rocks. And you stand back and go, whoa. They say it blows you away by its beauty. Because those who go from rim to rim, yes, it costs. Man, you got to get in shape before you take the trip. You're going to have to exercise some and get your ability to go and climb and move and be able to make this thing. And it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of pain along the way because, let me tell you, the key is keeping dry socks when you go hiking. Because your socks begin to get a little moist, you get blisters real quick. Even if you keep dry socks, your feet are going to hurt like they never hurt before. I promise you. They just will when you hike like that. And the soreness you're going to feel in the back of your legs and in the back from the backpack you're carrying in your back and all that, it's going to be painful. But that first sunset, it'll be worth all the pain. Can I tell you something? Isn't that like our relationship with God? There are some people that their relationship with God is just a Sunday morning thing. They just come to the edge and they look over on Sunday and they look at everybody worshiping God and they kind of get the God's big idea and the concept that he's big and that he's mighty and he's strong and they'll come when they have a need and they will say, oh yeah, here's my need, and they'll cry out to God. And God will be gracious and they'll see a part of God. And then they'll walk home and tell everybody, oh yeah, I've been to church, I've seen God. Then there are others of you that, man, you're saying, I'm taking this journey. I want to really get to know him. And you climb down. And yes, there's sacrifice involved. I still can't get used to this 9 o'clock morning thing. I'm telling you, that's about to kill me every Sunday morning. But I'm telling you, you guys are awesome. Every Sunday I keep saying, oh, they're not going to show up anymore. It's too early. But you show up every Sunday. You blow me away. I keep thinking, I just know my church. They're not going to keep doing this. But you keep doing it every Sunday. I go, they are really half crazy, aren't they? You really love God because you're on this journey. Man, some of you are traveling great distance to be here because you do 2 locations at some point. And I'm going, they're not going to keep doing this. But man, they got this hunger to see God. And they don't mind to get the blisters, and they don't mind the pain because they want to have an encounter with God. So they dig in deep. They look at his word. They let the Spirit reflect off those pages and reflect to them the things that God is teaching them and showing them. And they're seeing God like that nobody else is seeing him. Only about 10% or less than 10% actually go rim to rim. Pretty much standard for the church world too. There's only a small portion that really say, I'm hungry for God. I want to go the distance. And I believe all of you in here are that kind of people. That you're saying, you know what? I want to go the distance. I want to seek him. In seeking him, man, you see things that others don't. What I'm challenging you this morning is not just stop halfway, but keep pressing him. Because here's the third thing. When you do, you find him. You find God. Christian, if you'll come. Here's what I know this morning. I really believe in this congregation that the majority of you know God. The next service, I'm really going to you be in prayer. Next service, I'm believing God for 2 or 3 salvations next service. I'm not preaching for salvation this morning because I don't believe that's what we need to do right now. What we need to do right now is when you say, God, you know what? I need to make sure everything is right between me and you. Any area that I know that I'm still holding on to that's hindering me from having healthy relationships, help me to let go of these areas. God, let me bring them to the cross this morning and let me lay them at your feet. And if you're in the journey, man, I'm challenging you to keep pressing on with me. Let's keep marching together. Let's keep going down to see what God has in store for us. If you would, let's close by standing this morning. Christian's got a song that I asked him to play this morning. I don't think it's one you've ever sung before here, but it's a good song. The chorus is real catchy. And if you'd like to sing with him through the chorus, you feel free. We're going to put it on the overhead. But while we play the song, while we sing, I'm opening up the altars. The altars are open. It's still early. It's only 10:15. I've done really well this morning. And if you need to come to the altar and you just need to get with God and say, God, I got some things that I just want to take to you in prayer, these altars are open this morning. If you're saying this morning, I just want to hunger after God a little bit more, then I want you to know these altars are open. You can come to these altars and seek God and to pray. If you've got a need this morning and you would like me to pray with you, you just come and stand at these altars and I'll be glad to pray with you this morning. But let's run to God this morning. That's why we're here today. We're here to have an encounter with God. Let's not miss this opportunity. Christian?